Welcome to the Chopin channel. I'm Roberto Poli. It was the first of a series of lessons with Russell Sherman on Chopin's Barcarolle Opus 60 25 years ago that radically changed me as a musician. Sherman's playing departed from the predictable attitude of modern interpreters, and the work we did together aimed to develop precisely that. While many teachers seem keen on imitation as a developmental strategy, it stimulated me to find my own voice rather than forging clones of his own ideas. Our lesson involved a discussion of critical interpretive aspects, but there was one particular element that Russell Sherman never tired to stress: the importance of outlining the contrapuntal exchanges proposed by multi-voiced textures. As I quickly realized, which voices needed to be brought out was not the object of Sherman's aesthetics. It was a completely personal matter, as it implied infinite possibilities and mutations. And the implications of counterpoint were more relevant to him than a practical application of alternative melody lines, for example, brought out for the sake of variety. How crucial this essential principle was to my understanding of music as a phenomenon simply lay within the course of time. In fact, years passed before this awareness evolved into instinct. And even after 30 years, the technical and intellectual demands of this approach remain one of the most elusive aspects and perhaps the supreme challenge of my work at the piano. Roberto, since you are Italian, what is the exact meaning of sfogato? Russell Sherman asked me in one of our lessons in reference to the marking found in measure 78 of the Barcarolle. Being able to finally say or do something after keeping it inside for a long time, I mumbled. In retrospect, sfogato, as the past participle of the Italian verb sfogare, could be translated with a much simpler vented, let out, which could also suggest a negative connotation, to vent in anger, for example. But in that moment, it was the closest description of the term I was able to offer to him, because I had never thought of a possible English translation. A few days later, I was leafing through André Gide's Notes on Chopin, a book I had read somewhat superficially as a teenager. Gide compared Chopin's works to Baudelaire's Fleurs du Mal, assigning a whole new meaning to the word sfogato and its interpretation in this specific instance. Has any other musician used this term, felt the desire, the need to indicate this breathing openness, this breeze which, interrupting the rhythm, intervenes unexpectedly to refresh and perfume the middle section of the Barcarolle? Some music dictionaries support Gide's inspired description, translating sfogato as light and airy in style. Honestly, I was perplexed. Chopin was the first composer to employ the term in a score, but isn't the idea that he might have misused it tempting? The marking, in fact, has puzzled many and even created controversy. Unless Chopin confused sfogato with sfocato, out of focus, it was hard to believe that he would have used an instruction descriptive of such an intense emotional state as I described it for Russell Sherman. As I eventually learned, there was an alternative meaning, one with which we are less familiar today because of the substantial evolution that occurred in the world of opera over the last 2 centuries. Chopin may have referred to the so-called soprano sfogato, a soprano with a strong dramatic voice, yet capable of achieving extraordinary agility in the high register. Bellini, Rossini, Donizetti, Meyerbeer all created title roles or main supporting characters with the abilities of the soprano sfogato in mind. In those days, many leading roles were specifically written for legendary singers such as Maria Malibran, Giulia Grisi, Laure Cinti d'Amoreau, Giuditta Pasta, and Pauline Viardot, Malibran's sister. Especially in the case of Malibran, Viardot, and Pasta, their vocal range surpassed that of other contemporaneous singers, extending from the mezzo-soprano to the soprano acuto, with a natural-sounding lower register that encompassed the contralto. Such was the range of Amatilde Cascelli-Kenderland, who was described in an 1829 article from the Italian publication Teatri, Arti e Letterature as having una straordinaria voce di soprano sfogato, chiara, agile, vibrata ed estesa dal re sovracuto al si bemolle sotto le righe. An extraordinary soprano sfogato voice, clear, agile, vibrant, and extending from the high D to the B flat below the staff. In the early 19th century, voices that were powerful and at the same time athletic were described as illimitate, limitless, and senza impedimento, without impediment. In the mid-19th century, the classification of specific types of female voices had yet to be made. It was only in the 1840s that the term mezzo-soprano began to be used to indicate the middle vocal range. What we describe today as a coloratura soprano was at that time defined as soprano acuto, high soprano, although some sources seem to blur the distinction between acuto and sfogato. In the 20th century, the term sfogato went out of fashion, a fact that can be ascribed to the introduction of more specific attributions within the vocal range of the soprano. Terms such as soprano lirico, soprano drammatico, soprano leggero became accepted to categorize particular voice types and are still commonly used today. If Chopin borrowed the term sfogato from the world of early to mid-19th century opera, could it have been an allusion to the lightness and airiness of the passage in the Barcarolle, to be played with the precision and agility that a soprano sfogato would display in the upward and downward gesture of this extraordinary moment? This notion would be supported by the definition of the term as it is found in the Merriam-Webster dictionary. 1. Light and airy in performance, used as direction in music. 2. High and thin in tone, used chiefly of a voice in the phrase soprano sfogato. The same dictionary suggests that the root of the term be the verb fogare, from Latin fugare, to put to flight, from fuga, act of running away, flight. This idea, however, is misleading, as the Italian verb sfogare comes from the noun foga, impetus, ardor. Sfogare would correctly translate as to let out impetuous or ardent feelings. A description found in an important Italian dictionary sustains this view: manifestare apertamente stati d'animo o sentimenti prima controllati. To manifest openly emotional states or sentiments that had been restrained before. A definition that certainly echoes how I had described the term for Russell Sherman in my lesson. We gather another important piece of information from Richard Miller's 2004 Solutions for Singers, Tools for Performers and Teachers. Sfogato, Miller explains, is a kind of sound production that is warmer and more emotive and passionate than the norm, producing what some listeners perceive as a sensuous, richer sound. An excerpt from By the Way, written in 1898 by William Foster Apthorpe, may also give us an important clue. It is not long ago that I got a letter from an old-time opera-goer who could still remember the Rossini operas in their heyday and the great singers who sang in them. My correspondent called my attention, among other things, to the fact that Semiramide was written and generally rated as a grand dramatic part. It was not meant for a light, florid soprano sfogato, for one of the canary birds of the lyric stage, but for a heavy dramatic soprano, a singer like Titian's or Lily Lehmann, for instance. All those florid roulades, which we now regard as the most unmitigated sort of vocal fireworks, fit only for the rapid warbling of a light, agile voice, were originally sung more slowly, with full vibrato and the most grandiose dramatic expression. It takes something of a stretch of the imagination for us to conceive nowadays of such things being sung dramatically and in the grand style, but that they were so sung is indubitable. The old dramatic coloratura, sung with the full voice and at a moderate rate of speed, is now pretty much a thing of the past. Semiramide's roulades are sung nowadays by light voices in mezza voce and at a breakneck pace. The old grand style and dramatic stress have passed away from music of this sort and made place for a sheer display of vocal agility. Apthorp confirms that the soprano sfogato was a kind of voice whose upper register was supple, light, and virtuosic, but it also shares another important aspect of vocal practices. In the early part of the 19th century, the quick runs in sfogato roles were sung more slowly and given full expression, being never dissociated from the dramatic content of the aria in which they were found. It is of course possible that Chopin intended for the passage in the Barcarolle to be played lightly, airily, filigreed even. But we could also speculate a further meaning, that such approach, as Apthorp suggests, prescribed the use of a moderate rate of speed to give emphasis to the expression of a passage. By including the marking sfogato, Chopin may have desired to convey to the performer that the upward and downward runs of the passage should not be played quickly, texturally, the way the text suddenly using strings of 16th notes would suggest, and the way we hear many pianists do frequently today, but sung fully at a moderate pace. It would allow the registers involved to benefit from greater radiance provided by the long sustained pedals indicated.